You grow faster when you stop relying on people. Many people wait for support before they begin. They expect encouragement, agreement, or someone to move with them. When that support is missing, progress slows down. Not because they lack ability, but because their movement depends on others. This creates a quiet pattern where growth is delayed until conditions feel comfortable. Independence changes this completely. When you stop relying on people to start, you remove delay from your life. Decisions become quicker, actions become consistent, and your direction becomes clearer. This audiobook explores a simple idea. Growth accelerates when responsibility becomes personal. When you begin moving alone, your habits strengthen, your thinking sharpens, and your progress no longer depends on anyone else. Chapter 1. Why people depend on others to start. Many people do not realize that their progress is quietly delayed by a simple habit, waiting for others before they begin. They wait for encouragement, for someone to join them, or for approval that confirms they are moving in the right direction. This waiting feels reasonable because it creates a sense of safety. Starting alone can feel uncertain, while starting with others feels supported. But this habit builds a dependency that slows growth. The person is not lacking ability. They are delaying action until conditions feel comfortable. Over time, this pattern becomes normal. They begin associating progress with the presence of others instead of their own decision to move forward. The mind learns to pause instead of act. What seems like patience or preparation is often hesitation shaped by dependence. This is how reliance begins, not as a weakness, but as a repeated choice to wait instead of start. From early experiences, people are taught to move in groups. They learn in classrooms, work in teams, and often receive guidance before taking action. This creates a natural expectation that progress should involve others. While collaboration is valuable, it can also create an unconscious belief that independent action is incomplete. The mind begins to associate safety with shared movement. When a person considers starting something alone, they may feel uncertain or exposed. This feeling does not come from lack of ability. It comes from a pattern of relying on external presence. The brain has been trained to expect support, so acting without it feels unfamiliar. Over time, this expectation turns into hesitation. The person begins waiting for the same conditions they have always known, even when those conditions are not necessary for progress. Dependence often appears in subtle ways. A person may delay starting a project because they are waiting for someone to join them. They may hesitate to take action because they want confirmation that their idea is correct. These moments do not feel like dependence. They feel like preparation. Yet beneath them is a quiet reliance on others to reduce uncertainty. The mind seeks reassurance before committing to action. This creates a pattern where movement is linked to external input. Without that input, action slows down. The person may remain capable and motivated, but their progress becomes conditional. They move when support appears and pause when it does not. Fear plays a significant role in this dependence. Starting alone removes the comfort of shared responsibility. When others are present, decisions feel less risky because outcomes are shared. Alone, every decision feels more personal. The mind becomes more cautious because it cannot rely on external validation. This fear is not always obvious. It may appear as overthinking, planning, or waiting for better timing. In reality, it is the discomfort of acting without support. The person avoids this discomfort by delaying action. Over time, the mind reinforces this pattern, making independence feel more difficult than it actually is. Another reason people depend on others is the need for validation. Many individuals have learned to measure their decisions based on external approval. When others agree, the action feels correct. When approval is absent, doubt appears. This creates a cycle where confidence depends on feedback. The person becomes hesitant to act without confirmation. They begin seeking agreement before making decisions, even when they are capable of deciding on their own. This reliance on validation slows progress because action is delayed until approval is received. The mind becomes conditioned to wait rather than trust its own judgment. Comfort also contributes to dependence. Acting alone requires effort and responsibility. When others are involved, tasks feel lighter because they are shared. This creates a preference for group action. The mind begins associating comfort with collaboration and effort with independence. As a result, starting alone feels more demanding. The person may avoid this effort by waiting for others to participate. This habit does not come from laziness. It comes from a learned preference for ease. Over time, this preference becomes a barrier to independent progress. Social influence strengthens this pattern further. When people see others moving together, they may feel that starting alone is unusual. Society often emphasizes teamwork and shared success, which can unintentionally discourage independent action. The person begins comparing their approach to others and feels uncertain about moving alone. This comparison reinforces hesitation. The mind begins to believe that progress requires external alignment. This belief limits the ability to act independently, even when no real obstacle exists. Dependence also develops through repeated delay. Each time a person waits for others, the brain reinforces that behavior. The pattern becomes familiar and easier to repeat. The next time a similar situation appears, the mind automatically suggests waiting again. This repetition strengthens the habit. What started as a single delay becomes a consistent approach to action. The person may not notice how often they rely on others to begin. It feels natural because it has been practiced repeatedly. Over time, this habit affects confidence. When a person rarely starts alone, they do not build trust in their own decisions. Confidence grows through action, but dependence limits those opportunities. The person may feel uncertain about their ability to move forward independently because they have not practiced it enough. This creates a cycle where lack of confidence leads to dependence, and dependence prevents confidence from developing. The mind remains in a state of hesitation, waiting for external support instead of building internal strength. Breaking this pattern begins with awareness. The person must recognize when they are waiting unnecessarily. They begin noticing moments where action is delayed, not because it is impossible, but because it feels uncomfortable to start alone. This awareness reveals how often dependence influences behavior. Once the pattern is visible, it becomes easier to question it. The person realizes that many situations do not require external support to begin. Choosing to start alone, even in small ways, begins to change this pattern. Each independent action strengthens self-reliance. The mind learns that progress does not depend on others. It begins to associate movement with personal decision rather than external conditions. Over time, this new pattern becomes more familiar. Acting alone feels less uncomfortable because it has been practiced repeatedly. Understanding why people depend on others to start is the first step toward independence. The habit is not a sign of weakness. It is a learned pattern shaped by experience, comfort, and repetition. Once recognized, it can be changed through consistent action. The person begins moving forward based on their own decisions. Progress becomes faster because it is no longer delayed by external factors. The mind shifts from waiting to acting, creating a new direction driven by independence rather than dependence. Chapter 2. Waiting for support delays growth. Waiting for support often feels reasonable, even responsible. A person may believe they are being careful by not starting until everything is aligned. They wait for encouragement, for the right people, or for a sense of certainty before taking action. On the surface, this seems logical, but beneath it, a quiet delay begins forming. Growth does not pause while a person waits. Opportunities move, time passes, and the mind adapts to inaction. What feels like preparation slowly turns into hesitation. The person remains in the same place, not because they lack ability, but because they are tying their movement to conditions that may never fully arrive. This habit creates a gap between intention and action. Over time, that gap becomes a pattern, where starting is always postponed in favor of waiting for something external to feel complete. The mind often connects action with comfort. When support is present, decisions feel easier. There is reassurance, shared responsibility, and a sense of reduced risk. Without that support, uncertainty becomes more noticeable. The mind begins questioning whether it is the right time, whether the idea is good enough, or whether failure is possible. These questions do not always lead to better decisions. Instead, they create delay. The person waits for clarity that may only come through action. Growth requires movement, but waiting creates stillness. The longer the person remains still, the more difficult it becomes to begin. The mind adjusts to inactivity and starts treating it as normal. What was once a temporary pause becomes a default behavior. Waiting for support also weakens decision-making speed. When a person relies on others to confirm their direction, they begin delaying choices. Each decision requires external input before action can follow. This process slows progress significantly. Opportunities often require quick responses, but dependence on support creates hesitation. The person spends time seeking approval instead of moving forward. Over time, this habit reduces confidence. They begin doubting their ability to decide independently because they have not practiced it enough. The mind becomes dependent on external validation, and without it, action feels uncertain. Another hidden effect of waiting is the loss of momentum. Momentum builds through consistent action, not through planning alone. When a person delays starting, they interrupt the natural flow of progress. Each day of waiting makes it harder to begin because the mind becomes less engaged. Motivation decreases when action is postponed repeatedly. The person may feel less connected to their goals because they are not actively working toward them. This lack of movement creates a cycle where waiting reduces motivation and reduced motivation increases waiting. Breaking this cycle requires action, not more delay. Waiting for support can also create unrealistic expectations. A person may believe that once the right support appears, everything will become easier. They imagine that progress will happen quickly once conditions are perfect. This belief keeps them in a state of anticipation rather than action. In reality, support can help, but it does not replace effort. Progress still requires consistent work. By waiting for ideal conditions, the person avoids facing the reality that growth often begins in imperfect situations. This avoidance delays learning and experience, which are necessary for improvement. Fear is often hidden within the habit of waiting. Acting without support means taking full responsibility for the outcome. If the result is not as expected, there is no one else to share the blame. This responsibility can feel uncomfortable. To avoid it, the mind suggests waiting for others. This reduces the sense of risk, but it also prevents growth. The person avoids discomfort in the short term, but sacrifices progress in the long term. Understanding this connection helps reveal that waiting is not always about readiness. It is often about avoiding responsibility. The environment can reinforce this pattern as well. When people around someone frequently delay action or seek approval, it becomes normal behavior. The person begins adopting the same approach, believing it is the correct way to move forward. Social influence makes waiting feel acceptable, even expected. Over time, this creates a shared mindset where progress depends on group readiness instead of individual action. Breaking this pattern requires recognizing that growth is personal. It does not need to wait for others to begin. Another consequence of waiting is the loss of valuable experience. Every action provides feedback. When a person starts, they learn what works and what needs adjustment. Waiting delays this learning process. The person remains in a state of thinking without gaining real-world experience. This limits improvement because understanding comes from action, not from planning alone. Each delay postpones the opportunity to learn, making progress slower than it needs to be. Confidence is also affected by this habit. Confidence grows through action and repeated success, even in small steps. When a person waits for support, they miss opportunities to build this confidence. They rely on others to create a sense of certainty instead of developing it themselves. Over time, this reliance weakens self-trust. The person begins believing they need external input to move forward. This belief becomes a barrier to independent progress. Breaking the habit of waiting begins with small actions taken without support. A person does not need to make large changes immediately. They can start with simple steps that do not require external involvement. Each independent action strengthens self-reliance. The mind begins to recognize that progress is possible without waiting. This shift gradually reduces the need for external confirmation. Consistency is important in this process. Taking action once is helpful, but repeating it builds a new pattern. Each time the person chooses to act instead of wait, they weaken the old habit. Over time, action becomes more natural, and waiting becomes less appealing. The mind adapts to this new behavior, making it easier to continue. When a person stops waiting for support, growth accelerates naturally. Decisions become quicker, actions become more consistent, and progress becomes steady. The path forward is no longer dependent on external conditions. Instead, it is guided by personal choice. This shift creates independence, allowing the person to move at their own pace without delay. Chapter 3. Independence creates momentum. Independence changes the way progress begins. When a person stops waiting for others and starts acting on their own decisions, something subtle but powerful happens. Movement becomes immediate. There is no delay caused by seeking approval, no pause for coordination, and no hesitation tied to external conditions. Action starts when the decision is made. This direct connection between decision and action creates momentum. Momentum is not built through occasional effort. It grows through continuous movement. Independence removes the barriers that interrupt that movement. The person begins taking steps consistently, even if those steps are small. Over time, this consistency builds speed. Progress feels smoother because it is no longer dependent on factors outside of control. The mind begins associating action with personal choice rather than external readiness, creating a steady flow of forward movement. Momentum is often misunderstood as something that appears suddenly, but it is actually the result of repeated action. Independence allows these actions to occur without interruption. When a person relies on others, each step requires alignment. This slows down progress. With independence, the person can act whenever they decide. This freedom increases the frequency of action. Each completed task leads to the next one, creating a chain of movement. The mind begins adapting to this rhythm. It expects progress instead of delay. Over time, the effort required to start decreases because starting becomes familiar. The person no longer needs to overcome hesitation each time. Action becomes part of their routine, strengthening momentum further. One of the key benefits of independence is the ability to make decisions quickly. When a person depends on others, decisions often involve discussion, agreement, or confirmation. This process can take time and create uncertainty. Independence removes this layer. The person evaluates the situation and decides based on their understanding. This speed does not mean acting without thought. It means reducing unnecessary delay. Faster decisions lead to faster action, and faster action leads to faster learning. The person gains experience more quickly because they are not waiting for external input before moving forward. Momentum also builds confidence. Each independent action provides evidence that progress is possible without relying on others. The person begins trusting their ability to move forward. This trust reduces hesitation in future situations. Instead of questioning whether they can act alone, they already know they can. Confidence grows not from thinking about action, but from taking it repeatedly. Independence creates the conditions for this repetition, allowing confidence to develop naturally over time. Another important aspect of independence is the reduction of distraction. When multiple people are involved, attention is often divided between different ideas, opinions, and directions. This can slow progress and create confusion. Acting independently allows a person to focus fully on their goal. There is less interference from external influences. This clarity strengthens momentum because the person knows exactly what they are working toward. Focused effort produces faster results, which reinforces the desire to continue. Independence also encourages responsibility. When a person moves forward alone, they take full ownership of their actions and outcomes. There is no one else to rely on or blame. This responsibility increases commitment. The person becomes more attentive to their decisions because they understand the impact of their choices. This awareness leads to more thoughtful action. Over time, this habit of responsibility strengthens discipline, which supports consistent progress. The absence of external pressure can also improve momentum. When others are involved, expectations and opinions can create stress. This stress may slow action or lead to hesitation. Acting independently removes much of this pressure. The person works at their own pace, guided by their own standards. This freedom allows for steady progress without the interruptions caused by external expectations. The mind becomes more relaxed and focused, making it easier to maintain movement. Independence allows for faster adaptation. When a person takes action and encounters a problem, they can adjust immediately. There is no need to wait for discussion or agreement. This quick adjustment keeps momentum intact. The person learns from experience and applies those lessons right away. This continuous cycle of action and adjustment strengthens progress. Over time, the person becomes more skilled at handling challenges because they are actively engaged in solving them. Momentum also benefits from consistency, and independence makes consistency easier to maintain. When progress depends on others, schedules and priorities may not always align. This can create gaps in action. Acting independently removes these gaps. The person can work whenever they choose, maintaining a steady rhythm of effort. This consistency reinforces habits, making action more automatic over time. The mind becomes accustomed to regular progress, which strengthens momentum further. Another advantage of independence is the development of internal motivation. When a person relies on others, motivation may depend on external factors such as encouragement or accountability. Independence shifts motivation inward. The person learns to act based on their own goals and values. This internal motivation is more stable because it does not depend on external conditions. It supports long-term progress by maintaining action even when external support is absent. Independence also reduces hesitation caused by comparison. When working with others, people may compare their progress or abilities, which can create doubt. Acting alone removes this comparison. The person focuses on their own path without measuring it against others. This focus reduces unnecessary distraction and allows for consistent progress. The mind becomes more aligned with personal growth rather than external standards. When independence becomes a habit, momentum follows naturally. The person no longer waits for the right conditions or the presence of others. They act when the decision is made. This direct connection between thought and action creates continuous movement. Over time, This movement builds speed, confidence, and clarity. Progress becomes a natural result of consistent action. Independence does not guarantee immediate success, but it ensures that movement continues. And, with movement, momentum grows, carrying the person forward with increasing strength. Chapter 4. Responsibility. Speeds up decisions. Decisions often slow down when responsibility is unclear. When a person feels that outcomes depend on others, they hesitate. They wait for agreement, confirmation, or shared direction before moving forward. This delay creates a gap between intention and action. Responsibility changes this completely. When a person accepts that the decision is theirs alone, the process becomes simpler. There is no need to coordinate or seek permission. The mind focuses on evaluating the situation and choosing a direction. This clarity removes unnecessary layers from decision-making. The person no longer spends time waiting for external input. Instead, they act based on their understanding. This shift creates speed. Decisions become quicker because the mind is no longer divided between personal judgment and external approval. Responsibility also reduces overthinking. When multiple perspectives are involved, the mind tries to consider every opinion. This creates complexity. The person may analyze the same situation repeatedly, trying to ensure that everyone agrees. This process often leads to hesitation rather than clarity. When responsibility is personal, the focus narrows. The person considers what is necessary and makes a choice. Overthinking decreases because there are fewer variables to manage. The decision becomes more direct. This does not mean the person ignores important factors. It means they prioritize what matters most and act without unnecessary delay. Taking responsibility also builds decisiveness. Each time a person makes a decision independently, they strengthen their ability to choose quickly. The mind becomes familiar with the process of evaluating and acting. This familiarity reduces hesitation in future situations. The person learns that decisions do not need to be perfect to be effective. They understand that progress comes from action, not from endless analysis. Over time, this habit of decisiveness becomes natural. The mind no longer treats decisions as obstacles. It treats them as part of movement. Another important effect of responsibility is the ability to learn faster. When decisions are delayed, learning is also delayed. Action provides feedback, and feedback improves understanding. When a person takes responsibility and acts quickly, they gain experience sooner. This experience helps them refine future decisions. The cycle of decision, action, and learning becomes continuous. The person improves not by waiting for certainty, but by gaining information through action. Responsibility accelerates this cycle, allowing growth to happen more efficiently. Responsibility also removes the habit of blame. When outcomes depend on others, it becomes easy to shift responsibility. A person may attribute failure to external factors rather than examining their own choices. This habit prevents improvement because it avoids reflection. When responsibility is fully accepted, the person evaluates their decisions honestly. They look at what worked and what did not. This reflection leads to better decisions in the future. The mind becomes more accountable, which strengthens clarity and focus. Speed in decision-making does not mean acting impulsively. Responsibility encourages thoughtful but efficient choices. The person learns to gather enough information to make a decision without waiting for complete certainty. They understand that waiting for perfect clarity often leads to inaction. Instead, they make the best decision based on available information and adjust if necessary. This approach keeps progress moving. The mind becomes comfortable with making decisions in real time rather than delaying until everything feels certain. Responsibility also improves focus. When a person knows they are responsible for the outcome, their attention becomes sharper. They become more aware of details that influence their decision. This awareness leads to better judgment. The mind is not distracted by external expectations. It is focused on making the most effective choice. This clarity strengthens decision-making over time. The person becomes more confident in their ability to choose because they have practiced it repeatedly. Another benefit of responsibility is the reduction of hesitation caused by fear of judgment. When decisions involve others, the person may worry about how their choices will be perceived. This concern can slow down action. Taking full responsibility shifts the focus inward. The person evaluates decisions based on their goals rather than external opinions. This reduces the influence of judgment on the decision-making process. The mind becomes more independent, allowing faster and more confident choices. Responsibility also creates consistency. When decisions are influenced by others, they may vary depending on external input. This inconsistency can lead to confusion and slow progress. When a person takes responsibility, their decisions follow a clear direction. They develop a consistent approach to evaluating situations and taking action. This consistency strengthens habits, making decision-making more efficient. The mind becomes organized, reducing the time required to choose a path. The ability to act quickly also improves adaptability. When decisions are made faster, adjustments can happen sooner. If a choice leads to an unexpected outcome, the person can respond immediately. This flexibility keeps progress moving forward. Responsibility allows the person to adjust without waiting for external approval. The mind becomes more responsive, able to handle changes without delay. This adaptability is essential for maintaining momentum. Over time, responsibility transforms the way a person approaches decisions. Instead of seeing them as difficult or overwhelming, they become part of a natural process. The person trusts their ability to evaluate situations and act accordingly. This trust reduces hesitation and increases speed. Decisions are no longer avoided. They are handled with clarity and confidence. The mind becomes more efficient because it is practiced in making choices regularly. When responsibility becomes a habit, decisions no longer slow progress. They become part of movement. The person acts, learns, and adjusts without unnecessary delay. This creates a steady flow of action that supports growth. Responsibility removes the barriers that often complicate decision-making. It simplifies the process, allowing the mind to focus on what matters. Over time, this leads to faster progress, stronger confidence, and a clearer direction forward. Chapter 5. Moving alone builds self-trust. Self-trust is not something that appears suddenly. It is built slowly through repeated experiences where a person relies on their own decisions and follows through with action. Moving alone creates the conditions for this process. When a person acts without depending on others, they begin gathering evidence about their own ability. Each step taken independently becomes proof that progress is possible without external support. At first, this may feel uncomfortable because the mind is not used to carrying full responsibility. However, this discomfort is part of the process. It signals that the person is stepping beyond familiar patterns. Over time, the mind adapts. What once felt uncertain becomes manageable. The person begins to trust their judgment because they have seen it lead to results. This trust does not come from thinking about ability. It comes from experiencing it through consistent action. Many people struggle with self-trust because they rarely give themselves the opportunity to act independently. When decisions are shared or guided by others, the outcome does not fully reflect their own ability. This limits the development of confidence in personal judgment. Moving alone changes this dynamic. The person becomes responsible for both the decision and the result. This direct connection creates learning. If the outcome is positive, it reinforces trust. If it is not, It provides information for improvement. In both cases, the person gains understanding. Over time, this understanding strengthens their ability to make decisions without hesitation. Self-trust grows through repetition. A single independent action may not feel significant, but repeated actions build a pattern. Each time the person chooses to move forward alone, they reinforce the belief that they are capable. The brain begins recognizing this pattern and treating it as normal. This reduces doubt in future situations. The person no longer questions whether they can act alone because they have done it before. This familiarity replaces uncertainty with confidence. The mind becomes more stable because it relies on experience rather than assumption. Another important aspect of moving alone is the development of problem-solving skills. When a person depends on others, challenges are often shared. Solutions may come from external input. When moving independently, the person must find solutions themselves. This process strengthens thinking. The mind learns to analyze situations, consider options, and choose a course of action. Each problem solved independently becomes a source of confidence. The person begins trusting their ability to handle difficulty without relying on others. This trust extends to future challenges, making them easier to approach. Moving alone also reduces the influence of external opinions. When decisions involve others, feedback can create uncertainty. The person may question their choices based on differing perspectives. Acting independently removes this influence. The person evaluates situations based on their own understanding. This clarity strengthens self-trust because decisions are not constantly adjusted to fit external expectations. Over time, the mind becomes more confident in its own reasoning. The person learns to value their judgment instead of seeking constant validation. Consistency plays a key role in building self-trust. Acting independently once or twice may create a temporary sense of confidence, but consistent action creates lasting change. Each time the person follows through on their decisions, they reinforce reliability. The mind begins to expect follow-through rather than hesitation. This expectation strengthens trust because the person sees themselves as consistent. Reliability becomes part of their identity, influencing how they approach future actions. Self-trust also reduces fear of uncertainty. When a person has experience moving alone, they become familiar with the process of handling unknown situations. They understand that not everything needs to be certain before action is taken. This familiarity reduces hesitation. The person becomes more willing to take steps without waiting for perfect conditions. They trust that they can adapt as needed. This flexibility strengthens their ability to move forward consistently. Moving alone also encourages accountability. When the person is fully responsible for their actions, they become more aware of their decisions. This awareness leads to more thoughtful choices. The person considers the impact of their actions because they know they will experience the outcome directly. This connection between decision and result strengthens learning. The mind becomes more attentive, which improves future decisions. Another benefit of self-trust is emotional stability. When a person relies on others, their confidence may fluctuate based on external feedback. Positive feedback can increase confidence, while negative feedback can reduce it. Moving independently creates a more stable source of confidence. The person relies on their own experience rather than external validation. This stability allows them to remain focused even when external conditions change. Over time, moving alone changes how the person sees themselves. They begin identifying as someone who can act independently. This identity influences behavior. The person becomes more proactive, taking initiative without waiting for direction. This shift creates a stronger sense of control over their life. They no longer feel dependent on others to create progress. Instead, they recognize their ability to generate movement through their own actions. Self-trust also improves decision-making speed. When the person trusts their judgment, they spend less time questioning their choices. They evaluate the situation and act. This efficiency supports momentum. The person is able to move forward consistently without being slowed by doubt. The mind becomes more decisive because it relies on experience rather than uncertainty. In the end, moving alone builds a foundation of self-trust that supports every aspect of life. The person becomes more confident, more capable, and more independent in their thinking and actions. This trust is not based on belief alone. It is built through repeated experience. Each independent step strengthens the connection between thought and action. Over time, this creates a mind that trusts itself, allowing the person to move forward with clarity and confidence. Chapter 6. Silence strengthens focus. Silence is often misunderstood as emptiness, yet it is one of the most powerful conditions for clarity. When noise decreases, attention becomes sharper. Many people move through their days surrounded by constant input conversations, opinions, notifications, and distractions that pull the mind in multiple directions. In that environment, focus becomes fragmented. Thoughts are interrupted before they fully develop, and actions lose consistency. Silence changes this pattern. It creates space where the mind can concentrate without interference. When external noise is reduced, internal thinking becomes clearer. The person can observe their thoughts, organize their priorities, and act with greater intention. Silence does not remove responsibility or effort. It removes unnecessary distraction, allowing attention to settle on what truly matters. Focus strengthens when the mind is not constantly reacting. In a noisy environment, attention shifts quickly from one stimulus to another. This constant movement prevents deep thinking. Silence slows this process. It allows the mind to stay with one idea long enough to understand it fully. This depth of attention improves decision-making and learning. Instead of skimming across many thoughts, the person engages with fewer ideas more thoroughly. Over time, this habit of deep focus becomes natural. The mind becomes more disciplined, able to remain engaged without being pulled away by every distraction. Silence also reduces the influence of external opinions. When a person is surrounded by constant input, their thinking can become shaped by what they hear most often. They may begin doubting their decisions or adjusting their direction based on others' perspectives. Silence creates distance from this influence. It allows the person to hear their own thoughts without interruption. This clarity strengthens confidence because decisions are based on personal understanding rather than external pressure. The mind becomes more independent, focusing on internal reasoning instead of reacting to every opinion. Another important effect of silence is the ability to notice patterns. When the mind is busy, repetitive thoughts remain hidden. Silence brings these patterns into awareness. A person may notice recurring doubts, distractions, or habits that were previously unnoticed. This awareness allows them to address these patterns directly. Instead of being controlled by them, they begin guiding their thinking intentionally. Silence reveals what is happening beneath the surface, making it easier to adjust behavior. Silence also supports emotional stability. Constant noise can amplify emotions by keeping the mind in a reactive state. When attention is pulled in many directions, the person may feel overwhelmed or unsettled. Silence creates a calmer environment where emotions can settle. The person has time to process feelings instead of reacting immediately. This pause reduces impulsive decisions and encourages thoughtful responses. Over time, emotional reactions become more balanced because they are not constantly triggered by external stimuli. The connection between silence and productivity is also significant. When distractions are reduced, the mind can focus on completing tasks more efficiently. Work that might take hours in a distracted state can be completed more quickly in a focused environment. This efficiency builds momentum. The person sees progress, which encourages further action. Silence supports this process by allowing sustained attention. The mind becomes accustomed to working without interruption, improving both speed and quality of output. Silence is not only external but also internal. External quiet is helpful, but internal silence, reducing unnecessary mental noise, is equally important. The mind often creates its own distractions through constant thinking about unrelated topics. Practicing focus involves guiding attention back to the task at hand. Each time the mind wanders, it is gently redirected. This practice strengthens mental discipline. Over time, the mind becomes less scattered and more stable. Internal silence allows the person to remain present, improving both awareness and effectiveness. Another benefit of silence is improved decision-making. When the mind is overloaded with information, it becomes difficult to evaluate options clearly. Silence reduces this overload. It allows the person to consider fewer variables at a time, leading to more thoughtful decisions. The person can weigh options without feeling rushed or pressured. This clarity leads to better outcomes because decisions are based on careful consideration rather than impulsive reaction. Silence also enhances learning. When a person is fully focused, they absorb information more effectively. Distractions reduce the brain's ability to process and retain knowledge. Silence creates the conditions for deep learning. The person can engage with material without interruption, leading to better understanding. Over time, this habit improves skill development because the mind is fully engaged in the learning process. Consistency is key in developing focus through silence. Occasional quiet moments are helpful, but regular practice strengthens the effect. Creating periods of silence in daily routines allows the mind to reset and refocus. These moments do not need to be long. Even short periods of uninterrupted attention can improve clarity. Over time, the mind begins to expect and benefit from these moments, making focus easier to maintain. Silence also builds self-reliance. When a person becomes comfortable working without constant input, they rely more on their own thinking. This independence strengthens confidence. The person learns that they do not need constant stimulation or feedback to make progress. They can focus, decide, and act on their own. This ability supports long-term growth because it removes dependence on external conditions. In the end, silence strengthens focus by removing what is unnecessary. It creates space for clarity, concentration, and intentional action. The mind becomes less reactive and more deliberate. Decisions improve, productivity increases, and emotional stability grows. Over time, silence becomes a tool that supports progress. It allows the person to direct their attention with purpose, creating a steady path toward their goals. Chapter 7. Less opinions, more clarity. Clarity becomes difficult when too many voices influence your thinking. Every opinion adds another layer of interpretation, another direction to consider, and another reason to hesitate. At first, seeking opinions feels useful. It gives the impression of making a well-informed decision. But over time, this habit creates confusion instead of clarity. The mind becomes divided between different perspectives, unsure which one to follow. Instead of moving forward, it begins comparing, analyzing, and delaying. When opinions multiply, direction weakens. Less opinions does not mean ignoring valuable input completely. It means reducing unnecessary noise so the mind can think clearly. When the number of external influences decreases, internal reasoning becomes stronger. The person begins to see what they actually think rather than what they are told to think. Many people seek opinions to reduce uncertainty. They believe that more input will lead to better decisions. In reality, too many opinions often create conflict. Each person speaks from their own experience, which may not align with the situation at hand. The mind tries to accommodate every perspective, leading to hesitation. Instead of gaining clarity, the person becomes unsure of their own judgment. This uncertainty slows progress. Clarity comes from understanding the situation directly, not from collecting endless viewpoints. When a person limits the number of opinions they rely on, they simplify the decision-making process. The mind focuses on what matters instead of being pulled in multiple directions. External opinions can also weaken self-trust. When a person constantly seeks validation, they begin relying on others to confirm their decisions. Over time, this reduces confidence in their own thinking. The mind starts questioning its ability to choose without guidance. This creates dependence. The person feels uncertain when opinions are not available, even when they are capable of deciding independently. Reducing reliance on external input strengthens self-trust. The person learns to evaluate situations based on their own understanding. This shift builds confidence because decisions come from internal reasoning rather than external approval. Clarity improves when the mind has fewer variables to process. Each opinion introduces new information, which requires time and attention to evaluate. When too many variables are present, the mind becomes overwhelmed. It struggles to organize thoughts effectively. By limiting input, the person reduces complexity. The decision becomes easier to manage because there are fewer factors to consider. This simplicity allows the mind to focus on essential details. Clarity emerges when unnecessary information is removed. Another important effect of reducing opinions is the ability to act more quickly. When decisions depend on multiple perspectives, action is delayed until all input is gathered and evaluated. This process can take time, especially when opinions conflict. Acting with fewer opinions removes this delay. The person evaluates the situation and moves forward. This speed creates momentum. Instead of being stuck in analysis, the person progresses through action. Over time, this habit strengthens decisiveness, making future decisions easier. Opinions often reflect personal biases rather than objective reality. Each individual interprets situations based on their own experiences and beliefs. When a person relies heavily on others' perspectives, they may adopt those biases without realizing it. This can distort understanding. By reducing external input, the person gains a clearer view of the situation. They rely on direct observation rather than second-hand interpretation. This approach leads to more accurate decisions because it is based on personal understanding rather than borrowed assumptions. Less opinions also create mental space. When the mind is filled with multiple viewpoints, it becomes difficult to think deeply. Thoughts are interrupted by conflicting ideas, preventing full concentration. Reducing input allows the mind to focus on a single perspective long enough to understand it fully. This depth of thinking leads to better insights. The person is able to analyze situations more effectively because their attention is not divided. Another benefit of fewer opinions is emotional stability. Conflicting advice can create doubt and stress. The person may feel uncertain about which direction to choose, leading to frustration. When input is limited, the emotional pressure decreases. The person feels more in control because they are not constantly adjusting their thinking based on others' views. This stability supports clearer thinking and more confident action. Reducing opinions does not mean isolating completely. It means being selective about whose input is considered. Not all opinions are equally valuable. Some provide insight, while others create confusion. Choosing a small number of reliable sources helps maintain clarity. The person benefits from guidance without becoming overwhelmed. This balance allows for informed decisions without losing independence. Clarity also improves when decisions are aligned with personal goals. External opinions may not always consider these goals. They may reflect different priorities or perspectives. When a person focuses on their own direction, decisions become more consistent. The mind evaluates options based on what aligns with their objectives rather than trying to satisfy multiple viewpoints. This alignment simplifies decision-making and strengthens focus. Over time, the habit of relying less on opinions builds stronger thinking. The mind becomes more capable of evaluating situations independently. The person develops confidence in their ability to understand and decide. This independence reduces hesitation and increases clarity. Decisions are made with greater certainty because they are based on direct reasoning. In the end, less opinions leads to more clarity because it removes unnecessary noise. The mind becomes quieter, more focused, and more decisive. Instead of being influenced by every external voice, the person relies on their own understanding. This creates a stable foundation for decision-making. With fewer distractions, the path forward becomes clearer, allowing consistent progress without confusion. Chapter 8. Discipline replaces motivation. Motivation feels powerful, but it is inconsistent. It appears in moments of inspiration and disappears when conditions become difficult. Many people depend on motivation to begin, which creates an unstable pattern of progress. They act when they feel ready and stop when that feeling fades. Discipline replaces this uncertainty with consistency. It does not rely on how a person feels in the moment. Instead, it creates a system where action continues regardless of emotion. This shift changes everything. Progress is no longer tied to temporary energy. It becomes a result of repeated behavior. Discipline turns action into a habit rather than a reaction. Over time, the person stops waiting for the right feeling and starts acting based on decision. This creates steady movement, which builds momentum and leads to long-term results. The mind prefers comfort, and motivation often aligns with that preference. When something feels exciting or easy, motivation appears naturally. When effort is required, motivation decreases. This creates a cycle where a person starts strong but struggles to continue. Discipline breaks this cycle by removing the need for emotional readiness. It introduces structure. The person decides what needs to be done and follows through regardless of how they feel. At first, this may seem difficult because it goes against natural tendencies. However, with repetition, the mind adapts. What once required effort becomes familiar. The person no longer depends on motivation because discipline provides consistency. One of the key advantages of discipline is predictability. When actions are based on feelings, progress becomes unpredictable. Some days are productive, while others are not. This inconsistency slows growth. Discipline creates a routine. The person knows what they will do and when they will do it. This predictability reduces hesitation because there is no decision to make each time. The action becomes automatic. Over time, this routine strengthens habits, making it easier to maintain progress without relying on motivation. Discipline also reduces overthinking. When a person depends on motivation, they often question whether they feel ready to act. This creates unnecessary decision-making. Discipline removes this question. The focus shifts from, "Do I feel like doing this?" to, "This is what I do." This clarity simplifies thinking. The person spends less time deciding and more time acting. Over time, this reduces mental fatigue and increases efficiency. The mind becomes accustomed to following through without hesitation. Another important aspect of discipline is its role in building resilience. Challenges and setbacks are part of any process, and motivation often decreases when difficulties appear. Discipline ensures that action continues even in these moments. The person learns to move forward despite discomfort. This builds strength because they are not relying on favorable conditions. Each time they act, despite difficulty, They reinforce the ability to persist. Over time, this resilience becomes a natural part of their behavior. Discipline also strengthens self-control. When a person follows a structured approach, they learn to manage impulses. Instead of reacting to distractions or temporary desires, they stay focused on their goals. This control improves decision-making because actions are aligned with long-term objectives rather than short-term comfort. The mind becomes more disciplined in its thinking, not just in its actions. This alignment between thought and behavior creates consistency. Another benefit of discipline is the development of trust in oneself. When a person consistently follows through on their commitments, they begin to rely on their own ability. This builds confidence because it is based on evidence. The person sees that they can act even when motivation is low. This trust reduces hesitation in future situations. They no longer question whether they will follow through because they have proven it repeatedly. Discipline also improves focus. When actions are consistent, the mind becomes more engaged in the process. There is less distraction because the person is committed to their routine. This focus increases productivity. Tasks are completed more efficiently because attention is not divided. Over time, this focused approach leads to better results. The person becomes more effective because they are consistently applying effort. The process of replacing motivation with discipline often begins with small steps. Large changes can feel overwhelming, making it difficult to maintain consistency. Starting with manageable actions allows the person to build discipline gradually. Each small success reinforces the habit. Over time, these small actions accumulate into significant progress. The mind adapts to the routine, making it easier to continue. Consistency is the key to making discipline effective. Acting occasionally will not create lasting change. It is the repeated practice that reshapes behavior. Each day of consistent action strengthens the pattern. The brain begins to expect this behavior, making it easier to maintain. Over time, discipline becomes automatic. The person no longer needs to think about whether to act. They simply follow their routine. Another important aspect of discipline is its independence from external conditions. Motivation often depends on environment, mood, or circumstances. Discipline remains stable regardless of these factors. The person continues acting even when conditions are not ideal. This stability ensures that progress does not stop. It allows the person to maintain momentum in any situation. In the end, discipline replaces motivation by creating a reliable system for action. It removes the uncertainty caused by fluctuating emotions and replaces it with consistency. The person no longer waits for the right moment. They create progress through repeated effort. Over time, this approach leads to stronger habits, better results, and a more stable mindset. Discipline becomes the foundation of growth, allowing the person to move forward consistently without relying on temporary motivation. Discipline begins to change the relationship a person has with effort. At first, effort feels heavy because it requires pushing against resistance. The mind prefers ease, so any structured action feels like pressure. However, as discipline is practiced consistently, effort becomes more familiar. The person no longer experiences it as something unusual or exhausting. Instead, it becomes part of their normal routine. This shift reduces the mental struggle associated with starting. The mind stops negotiating and starts accepting action as a standard behavior. Over time, effort feels lighter, not because the task has changed, but because the resistance has decreased. Discipline transforms effort from something that must be forced into something that is expected. This expectation removes hesitation and creates a smoother path toward consistent action. As discipline deepens, it also reshapes how time is used. When a person relies on motivation, time is often wasted waiting for the right feeling to appear. Hours pass without meaningful progress because the person is not ready to act. Discipline eliminates this waiting. The person begins using time intentionally, focusing on tasks that move them forward. This shift increases productivity because action becomes consistent rather than occasional. Each day contributes to progress, creating a sense of continuity. The mind becomes more aware of how time is spent, leading to better decisions about priorities. Over time, disciplined use of time compounds into significant results, turning small daily actions into long-term achievement. Discipline also strengthens the ability to start tasks quickly. Many people struggle not with the task itself, but with beginning. They hesitate, delay, and overthink the first step. Discipline removes this barrier by creating a habit of immediate action. When a task is identified, the person begins without unnecessary delay. This habit reduces the mental effort required to start. The more often this is practiced, the easier it becomes. Starting turns into a natural response rather than a challenge. This ability to begin quickly increases efficiency and keeps momentum strong. The mind becomes conditioned to act rather than wait. Another important change is how discipline affects long-term thinking. Motivation often focuses on short-term satisfaction. It seeks immediate results and may lose interest when progress is slow. Discipline shifts attention toward long-term outcomes. The person understands that consistent effort over time leads to meaningful results. This perspective reduces impatience. Instead of expecting quick success, they focus on steady improvement. Each action is seen as part of a larger process. This mindset creates stability because the person is not discouraged by temporary setbacks. They continue moving forward, knowing that progress accumulates over time. Discipline also reduces dependence on external rewards. When a person relies on motivation, they often seek immediate satisfaction from their actions. If the reward is not present, they lose interest. Discipline changes this by creating intrinsic value in the process itself. The person begins to appreciate the act of working toward their goal. Progress becomes its own reward. This internal motivation is more stable because it does not depend on external conditions. The person continues acting even when results are not immediately visible. This consistency leads to stronger long-term outcomes. The role of discipline in shaping identity is also significant. Repeated actions influence how a person sees themselves. When someone consistently follows through on their commitments, they begin identifying as disciplined. This identity reinforces behavior. The person acts in ways that align with how they see themselves. Over time, discipline becomes part of who they are, rather than something they do occasionally. This shift makes it easier to maintain consistent behavior because it is connected to identity rather than effort alone. Discipline also improves the ability to handle distractions. In a world filled with constant interruptions, maintaining focus can be difficult. Discipline trains the mind to stay on task despite these distractions. The person learns to recognize when their attention is being pulled away and redirects it intentionally. This practice strengthens concentration over time. The mind becomes less reactive to external stimuli, allowing for deeper engagement with tasks. This improved focus increases productivity and enhances the quality of work. Another benefit of discipline is its effect on emotional control. When a person acts consistently, they become less influenced by temporary emotional states. They learn that feelings do not need to dictate behavior. This creates stability. The person can continue working even when they feel tired, unmotivated, or uncertain. Over time, this reduces the impact of emotional fluctuations on progress. The mind becomes more balanced, allowing for consistent action regardless of how the person feels in the moment. Discipline also enhances learning by encouraging repetition. Skills improve through consistent practice, and discipline ensures that practice occurs regularly. The person does not wait for the right moment to learn, they create that moment through routine. This repeated exposure strengthens understanding and builds competence. Over time, the person becomes more skilled because they have invested consistent effort. Learning becomes part of their daily process rather than an occasional activity. The connection between discipline and confidence becomes more evident over time. Each completed task reinforces the belief that the person can follow through. This builds confidence based on experience rather than assumption. The person trusts their ability to act because they have proven it repeatedly. This trust reduces hesitation and increases willingness to take on challenges. Confidence becomes stable because it is supported by consistent action. Discipline also supports adaptability. When a person is consistent in their efforts, they are better prepared to handle changes. They can adjust their approach without losing momentum. This flexibility allows them to navigate different situations effectively. The mind becomes more resilient because it is used to maintaining progress under varying conditions. This adaptability is essential for long-term success. In the end, discipline creates a foundation for continuous growth. It removes dependence on temporary motivation and replaces it with reliable action. The person develops habits that support progress, allowing them to move forward consistently. Over time, this approach leads to meaningful change. The mind becomes aligned with long-term goals, creating a steady path toward achievement. Chapter 9. Consistency without external pressure. Consistency becomes fragile when it depends on external pressure. Many people stay active only when someone is watching, expecting, or reminding them. They work harder under deadlines, supervision, or accountability from others, but once that pressure disappears, their effort fades. This creates an unstable pattern where progress rises and falls based on outside influence. True consistency begins when action is no longer tied to being observed. When a person learns to act without external pressure, their progress becomes steady. They are no longer reacting to circumstances, but following their own structure. This shift changes everything. Effort becomes reliable, not because someone demands it, but because the person has decided to maintain it. Over time, this independence creates a rhythm of action that continues regardless of external conditions. External pressure often creates short bursts of productivity rather than long-term consistency. A person may work intensely to meet a deadline, but lose momentum afterward. This pattern feels productive in the moment, but does not build lasting habits. Without pressure, the person returns to inaction because the behavior was never internalized. Consistency requires repetition without reliance on urgency. It develops through steady effort, not temporary intensity. When a person removes the need for external triggers, they begin creating a sustainable pattern of progress. This pattern becomes stronger with time because it is not dependent on unpredictable factors. Acting without external pressure requires internal structure. The person must define what needs to be done and follow through without being reminded. This may involve creating routines, setting clear priorities, and committing to specific actions each day. At first, this can feel challenging because there is no immediate consequence for stopping. However, with repetition, the mind begins to accept this structure as normal. The person no longer needs external prompts because the behavior has become part of their routine. This internal structure supports consistency even when motivation is low. Self-discipline plays a central role in maintaining consistency without pressure. When a person relies on others to enforce action, they do not fully develop control over their own behavior. Acting independently strengthens this control. Each time the person follows through without being told, they reinforce their ability to maintain effort. Over time, this builds a sense of reliability. The person begins trusting themselves to act regardless of external conditions. This trust strengthens consistency because action becomes a personal commitment rather than a response to pressure. Consistency without external pressure also improves focus. When effort is driven by urgency, attention may be scattered as the person rushes to meet expectations. Without pressure, the person can focus more deliberately on their tasks. They are not reacting to deadlines, but working through a planned approach. This calm and steady focus improves the quality of work. The mind becomes more engaged because it is not overwhelmed by urgency. Over time, this leads to better results and a deeper understanding of the process. Another benefit of internal consistency is emotional stability. External pressure can create stress, which may lead to burnout or inconsistency over time. Acting without pressure reduces this stress. The person works at a sustainable pace, maintaining balance between effort and rest. This stability allows them to continue over long periods without feeling overwhelmed. The mind becomes more resilient because it is not constantly reacting to high-pressure situations. This emotional balance supports consistent action. Consistency also strengthens identity. When a person acts regularly without being pushed, they begin seeing themselves as disciplined and reliable. This identity reinforces behavior. The person does not need external reminders because their actions align with how they see themselves. Over time, consistency becomes part of their character. This internal alignment makes it easier to maintain effort because it feels natural rather than forced. Without external pressure, decision-making becomes more intentional. The person chooses to act based on their goals rather than reacting to immediate demands. This creates a sense of control over their progress. They are not waiting for deadlines or expectations to guide them. Instead, they move forward according to their own plan. This independence allows for better prioritization and more efficient use of time. Consistency without pressure also improves long-term progress. When effort is steady, results accumulate gradually. Small daily actions build into significant outcomes over time. This approach avoids the highs and lows of pressure-driven productivity. The person maintains a constant level of effort, which leads to more reliable results. Over time, this steady progress becomes more effective than inconsistent bursts of activity. Another important aspect is adaptability. When a person is not dependent on external pressure, they can adjust their approach more easily. They are not limited by deadlines or expectations. This flexibility allows them to respond to changes without losing momentum. The mind becomes more capable of maintaining consistency in different situations because it is not tied to specific conditions. Building consistency without external pressure requires patience. The habit does not form immediately. The person may initially struggle to maintain effort without reminders. However, with repeated practice, the mind adapts. Each time they act independently, they strengthen the pattern. Over time, consistency becomes easier to maintain. The person no longer relies on external triggers because the behavior has been internalized. In the end, consistency without external pressure creates independence in action. The person becomes self-directed, capable of maintaining effort regardless of circumstances. Progress becomes stable because it is no longer influenced by external factors. This stability leads to continuous growth. The mind learns to act based on internal commitment, creating a reliable path forward. Consistency without external pressure begins to reshape how a person experiences effort. Instead of feeling pushed into action, they begin choosing it. This difference may seem small, but it changes the entire mindset. When action is chosen, it carries a sense of ownership. The person is not reacting to demands. They are following a direction they have set themselves. This creates a deeper connection to the work. Effort becomes meaningful rather than forced. Over time, this sense of ownership strengthens commitment. The person becomes less likely to stop because the reason for continuing is internal. This internal drive is more stable than external pressure because it does not depend on changing circumstances. It allows consistency to continue even when no one is watching or expecting anything. As this pattern develops, the mind begins to reduce resistance toward routine. At first, following a self-imposed structure can feel difficult because there is no immediate consequence for stopping. The mind may question whether the effort is necessary. However, repeated action gradually removes this resistance. The routine becomes familiar, and familiarity reduces hesitation. The person no longer debates whether to act. They simply follow the pattern they have built. This shift reduces mental effort because fewer decisions are required. The mind becomes more efficient, focusing on execution rather than negotiation. Consistency without external pressure also changes how progress is measured. Instead of focusing only on visible results, the person begins valuing the process itself. Each day of consistent action becomes a form of progress. This perspective reduces frustration because improvement is not tied solely to outcomes. The person recognizes that showing up regularly is a form of success. This mindset encourages continuation even when results are not immediately visible. Over time, this approach leads to greater satisfaction because progress is experienced continuously rather than occasionally. Another important effect is the development of patience. External pressure often creates urgency, which can lead to rushed actions and unrealistic expectations. Without that pressure, the person learns to work at a steady pace. They understand that meaningful progress takes time. This patience reduces the tendency to quit when results are slow. The person becomes comfortable with gradual improvement. This comfort allows them to continue longer, which ultimately leads to better outcomes. Patience supports consistency by removing the need for immediate results. The absence of external pressure also encourages self-reflection. When a person is not constantly reacting to deadlines or expectations, they have time to evaluate their actions. They can observe what is working and what needs adjustment. This reflection improves efficiency because the person learns from their own experience. They become more aware of their patterns and can make better decisions moving forward. Over time, this self-awareness strengthens consistency because actions become more intentional. Consistency without pressure also enhances discipline in thinking. The person learns to guide their thoughts in the same way they guide their actions. Instead of allowing distractions to control attention, they redirect their focus intentionally. This mental discipline supports consistent behavior because thoughts and actions become aligned. The person is not only acting consistently, but also thinking in a way that supports their goals. This alignment creates a stronger foundation for progress. Another benefit is the ability to maintain effort during difficult periods. External pressure may push a person to act temporarily, but it does not always sustain effort during challenges. Internal consistency allows the person to continue even when conditions are not ideal. They rely on their routine rather than their environment. This reliability creates resilience. The person becomes less affected by external changes because their behavior is guided by internal structure. Consistency also improves the relationship with time. When actions are consistent, time is used more effectively. The person does not waste time waiting for motivation or reacting to external demands. They follow a planned approach, which creates efficiency. Over time, this leads to better time management. The person becomes more aware of how their actions contribute to long-term progress. This awareness reinforces the importance of maintaining consistency. The process also strengthens independence. When a person can maintain effort without external pressure, they become less dependent on others for progress. This independence creates freedom. The person can move at their own pace, make their own decisions, and follow their own direction. This freedom supports consistency because it removes external limitations. The person is no longer waiting for conditions to align. They create their own conditions through action. Another important change is the reduction of stress associated with performance. External pressure often creates anxiety because the person feels judged or evaluated. Without this pressure, the focus shifts from performance to improvement. The person works to get better rather than to meet expectations. This shift reduces stress and allows for more effective effort. The mind becomes calmer, which supports consistent action over time. Consistency without pressure also builds long-term confidence. Each day of independent action reinforces the belief that progress is possible without external influence. The person sees that they can rely on themselves to maintain effort. This confidence becomes stable because it is based on repeated experience. Over time, the person trusts their ability to continue regardless of circumstances. In the end, consistency without external pressure transforms how a person approaches growth. It replaces reactive behavior with intentional action. The person becomes self-directed, maintaining effort through internal commitment rather than external demand. This shift creates a stable foundation for progress. Over time, consistent action leads to meaningful results, not because of pressure, but because of steady, deliberate effort. Chapter 10. Building confidence through action. Confidence is often treated as something you must feel before you act, but in reality, it is built through action itself. Many people wait until they feel ready, certain, or capable before taking the first step. This waiting creates a cycle where action is delayed and confidence never has the chance to grow. The truth is that confidence does not appear at the beginning. It develops during the process. Each time a person takes action, even in small ways, they gather evidence that they are capable of moving forward. This evidence becomes the foundation of confidence. It is not based on imagination or belief alone, but on repeated experience. Action creates familiarity, and familiarity reduces fear. Over time, what once felt difficult becomes manageable. Confidence grows naturally because the person has seen themselves act, adapt, and continue. The first step is often the most difficult because it happens without proof. The person does not yet have experience to rely on, so doubt feels stronger. This is where action becomes essential. By starting, even without certainty, the person begins breaking the pattern of hesitation. The mind learns that movement is possible, even in the presence of doubt. This initial action may not feel perfect, but perfection is not required. What matters is the shift from thinking to doing. Each step taken reduces the gap between intention and reality. Over time, this gap disappears and action becomes more natural. Confidence grows through repetition. A single action may create a brief sense of progress, but repeated action builds lasting change. Each time the person follows through, they reinforce the idea that they can rely on themselves. This repetition strengthens the connection between decision and action. The mind becomes accustomed to acting instead of hesitating. Over time, this pattern replaces doubt with familiarity. The person no longer questions whether they can act because they have done it many times before. Action also reduces fear by turning the unknown into something understood. Many fears are based on uncertainty. The mind imagines possible outcomes without having experienced them. When a person takes action, they replace imagination with reality. They see what actually happens instead of what they thought might happen. This experience reduces exaggerated fear. The person realizes that the situation is manageable. Each experience adds to this understanding, gradually weakening the fear that once caused hesitation. Another important aspect is that action provides feedback. Without action, a person cannot know what works and what needs adjustment. Feedback is essential for improvement. When a person acts, they learn from the outcome. This learning strengthens confidence because it shows that progress is possible. Even mistakes become valuable because they provide information. The person begins seeing challenges as opportunities to improve rather than reasons to stop. This perspective supports continued action, which further builds confidence. Confidence also develops through solving problems independently. When a person faces a challenge and finds a solution through their own effort, they gain trust in their ability. This trust becomes a source of confidence. It is not based on external validation, but on personal experience. Each problem solved strengthens this trust. Over time, the person becomes more comfortable facing new challenges because they have learned how to handle difficulty. Action also shifts focus away from doubt. When a person is inactive, the mind has more time to think about potential problems. This can increase hesitation. When the person is engaged in action, attention is directed toward the task. This reduces overthinking and creates a sense of progress. The mind becomes more focused on what is being done rather than what might go wrong. This shift supports confidence because it keeps the person moving forward. Consistency is essential in building confidence through action. Acting once or twice is helpful, but regular action creates lasting change. Each consistent effort reinforces the belief that the person can continue. Over time, this creates stability. Confidence becomes less dependent on temporary success and more based on the habit of showing up. The person trusts the process because they have experienced it repeatedly. Another benefit of action is the development of resilience. Not every action will lead to immediate success. There will be challenges and setbacks. However, each time the person continues despite these difficulties, they strengthen their resilience. This resilience becomes part of their confidence. They know that they can handle setbacks and keep moving forward. This knowledge reduces the fear of failure because failure is no longer seen as an endpoint. Action also improves clarity. When a person is inactive, their thinking may remain unclear. They may not fully understand what they need to do or how to proceed. Taking action reveals what works and what does not. This clarity improves decision-making. The person becomes more confident in their choices because they are based on experience rather than assumption. Over time, this clarity strengthens confidence further. As confidence grows, the person begins taking larger actions. What once felt challenging becomes manageable, allowing for greater effort. This progression creates a cycle where action builds confidence and confidence supports further action. Each step leads to the next, creating continuous growth. The person becomes more capable because they are consistently practicing action. In the end, confidence is not something that appears before action. It is created by it. Through repeated effort, learning, and adaptation, the mind begins trusting itself. This trust forms the foundation of confidence. The person no longer waits for the right feeling to begin. They act, and through that action, they become more capable. Over time, confidence becomes a natural result of consistent movement forward. Confidence continues to deepen when action becomes a daily standard rather than an occasional effort. When a person commits to showing up consistently, even when progress feels slow, they begin building a quiet form of strength. This strength does not come from dramatic success, but from reliability. The mind learns that action is not dependent on mood, energy, or perfect conditions. It becomes part of the person's routine. Over time, this consistency removes the uncertainty around starting. The person no longer questions whether they will act. They already know they will. This certainty strengthens confidence because it is based on repeated proof. Each day becomes an opportunity to reinforce that identity. The person is no longer someone who tries occasionally. They become someone who follows through regularly, and that shift changes how they approach every challenge. As action becomes consistent, the relationship with failure begins to change. Many people avoid action because they associate failure with negative outcomes. However, repeated action reveals a different perspective. Failure becomes information rather than a setback. Each attempt provides insight into what works and what does not. This understanding reduces the emotional weight of failure. The person becomes more willing to try because they know that each effort contributes to learning. Confidence grows because fear loses its control. The person no longer sees failure as something to avoid, but as part of the process. This shift allows them to continue acting without hesitation, even when results are uncertain. Another important development is the ability to handle uncertainty with greater ease. Action exposes the mind to situations where outcomes are not guaranteed. At first, this may feel uncomfortable. However, repeated exposure builds familiarity. The person learns that uncertainty does not prevent progress. They begin to trust their ability to navigate unknown situations. This trust strengthens confidence because it reduces the need for complete certainty before acting. The person becomes more adaptable, able to move forward, even when the path is not fully clear. This flexibility is a key part of sustained confidence. Action also builds confidence through visible progress. Even small improvements create a sense of achievement. The person begins to see the results of their efforts, which reinforces their belief in their ability. This feedback loop strengthens motivation to continue. Each improvement, no matter how minor, becomes evidence of growth. Over time, these small changes accumulate into significant progress. The person recognizes that consistent action leads to results, which further strengthens their confidence. As confidence increases, the person begins setting higher standards for themselves. They no longer settle for minimal effort because they have experienced the benefits of consistent action. This shift raises the level of performance. The person challenges themselves to improve further, creating a cycle of growth. Each new challenge provides an opportunity to strengthen confidence. The mind becomes more comfortable with effort because it has learned that effort leads to progress. Another important effect is the reduction of reliance on external validation. When confidence is built through action, it becomes internal. The person does not need others to confirm their ability because they have experienced it themselves. This independence creates stability. The person remains confident even when external feedback is absent. Their confidence is not influenced by others' opinions because it is based on personal experience. This stability allows them to continue acting regardless of external conditions. Action also improves the ability to recover quickly from setbacks. When a person is used to acting consistently, interruptions become temporary rather than permanent. They return to their routine without significant delay. This ability to recover strengthens confidence because it shows that progress is not easily lost. The person learns that they can regain momentum quickly, which reduces fear of disruption. Confidence through action also leads to better decision-making. The person becomes more comfortable making choices because they have experience with different outcomes. They understand that decisions do not need to be perfect. They only need to lead to action. This perspective reduces hesitation and increases efficiency. The mind becomes more decisive, allowing the person to move forward without unnecessary delay. Another benefit is the development of focus. When a person is consistently taking action, their attention becomes more directed. They are less distracted by irrelevant thoughts because they are engaged in meaningful work. This focus improves the quality of their efforts. The person becomes more effective because their energy is concentrated on their goals. This effectiveness reinforces confidence, creating a positive cycle of improvement. Action also strengthens discipline, which supports long-term confidence. Discipline ensures that action continues even when motivation is low. This consistency builds reliability. The person trusts their ability to maintain effort because they have done so repeatedly. This trust becomes a core part of their confidence. They no longer rely on temporary feelings to guide their behavior. Over time, confidence built through action becomes a stable foundation. It is not affected by temporary success or failure because it is rooted in consistent effort. The person understands that they can adapt, learn, and continue regardless of circumstances. This understanding creates resilience, allowing them to face challenges with greater ease. In the end, continued action transforms confidence into a lasting quality. It becomes part of how the person thinks and behaves. They approach situations with a sense of capability, not because they believe they are perfect, but because they trust their ability to act. This trust is built through experience, and it continues to grow as long as action remains consistent. Chapter 11. Growth without approval. Many people delay their growth because they are waiting for approval they may never receive. They want reassurance that their direction is correct, that their actions are acceptable, and that others support what they are doing. This desire feels natural because approval creates a sense of safety. It reduces doubt and makes decisions feel easier. But when growth depends on approval, progress becomes uncertain. The person begins adjusting their actions based on how they might be judged, rather than what is actually needed. This creates hesitation. Instead of moving forward, they pause, waiting for validation. Over time, this habit slows growth because action is no longer guided by purpose. It is guided by the expectation of acceptance. True progress begins when a person understands that approval is not required to move forward. It is optional, not essential. Approval often comes from external sources that do not fully understand a person's goals. People offer opinions based on their own experiences, fears, and perspectives. While some input can be helpful, relying on it completely creates confusion. The person may receive conflicting advice, leading to uncertainty. They begin questioning their own judgment because they are trying to align with multiple viewpoints. This slows decision-making. Instead of focusing on their direction, they focus on meeting expectations. Growth requires clarity, and too much dependence on approval reduces that clarity. The person becomes distracted from their path. The need for approval is often connected to fear of judgment. Acting without approval means accepting the possibility that others may disagree. This can feel uncomfortable because it challenges the desire to be accepted. To avoid this discomfort, the person delays action. They wait until they feel confident that their choice will be supported. However, this waiting creates stagnation. Growth requires movement, and movement sometimes involves disagreement. When a person accepts that not everyone will approve, they free themselves to act. This acceptance reduces hesitation and allows progress to continue. Another effect of seeking approval is the loss of authenticity. When decisions are influenced by others' expectations, the person may act in ways that do not align with their true goals. They adjust their behavior to fit what is accepted rather than what is meaningful. Over time, this creates dissatisfaction because the person is not fully engaged in their own path. Growth becomes limited because it is shaped by external standards. Acting without approval allows the person to follow their own direction. This alignment creates deeper engagement and more meaningful progress. Growth without approval also strengthens self-trust. When a person makes decisions independently, they begin relying on their own judgment. Each decision becomes an opportunity to learn and improve. Over time, this builds confidence in their ability to choose effectively. The person no longer needs constant reassurance because they trust their understanding. This trust is essential for consistent progress. It allows the person to move forward without hesitation, even when external feedback is absent. Approval can create a cycle of dependence. The more a person seeks validation, the more they rely on it. This reliance makes it difficult to act independently. The person may feel uncertain without external input, even in situations where they are capable of deciding. Breaking this cycle requires reducing the need for approval gradually. The person begins making small decisions without seeking validation. Each independent action strengthens their ability to rely on themselves. Over time, this reduces dependence and increases confidence. Another important aspect is the speed of growth. When a person waits for approval, they delay action. Each delay slows progress. Acting without approval removes this delay. The person can move forward immediately, gaining experience and learning faster. This increased speed creates momentum. The person becomes more engaged in the process because they are actively moving rather than waiting. Over time, this momentum leads to greater development. Growth without approval also improves resilience. When a person is not dependent on external validation, they are less affected by criticism or disagreement. They understand that not all feedback needs to be accepted. This perspective allows them to remain focused on their goals. The person becomes more stable because their progress is not influenced by others' opinions. This stability supports long-term growth. Acting without approval also encourages responsibility. The person takes full ownership of their decisions and outcomes. This responsibility leads to greater awareness. The person becomes more thoughtful in their actions because they understand the impact of their choices. This awareness improves decision-making over time. The person learns from their experiences and adjusts accordingly. Another benefit is clarity. When a person is not influenced by multiple opinions, their thinking becomes simpler. They can focus on what matters without distraction. This clarity improves efficiency because decisions are made more quickly. The person spends less time analyzing and more time acting. This leads to consistent progress. Over time, growth without approval becomes a habit. The person becomes comfortable, acting independently. They no longer feel the need to seek validation for every decision. This independence strengthens their ability to move forward consistently. The mind becomes more confident because it relies on personal experience rather than external input. In the end, growth without approval creates freedom. The person is no longer limited by others' expectations. They can pursue their goals based on their own understanding. This freedom allows for faster, more meaningful progress. The person becomes more focused, more confident, and more independent. Growth becomes a personal journey guided by intention rather than approval. Growth without approval begins to reshape how a person interprets feedback. Instead of seeing every opinion as something that must be accepted or rejected emotionally, the person starts viewing it as information. This shift removes the pressure to agree or defend. The mind becomes more selective, choosing what is useful and ignoring what is not. This approach creates balance. The person is no longer controlled by praise or discouraged by criticism. They evaluate feedback calmly and continue moving forward. Over time, this habit strengthens independence because decisions are not constantly adjusted based on others' reactions. The person learns to stay aligned with their direction while still remaining open to learning. This balance allows growth to continue without interruption. As this mindset develops, the need to explain every decision begins to fade. Many people feel the urge to justify their actions so others understand and approve. This habit consumes time and energy. It shifts focus away from action and toward explanation. Growth without approval removes this need. The person realizes that not every decision requires validation or explanation. They act based on their understanding and allow results to speak over time. This reduces unnecessary conversation and increases efficiency. The mind becomes more focused because it is not distracted by the need to be understood by everyone. Another important change is the ability to move quietly. When a person stops seeking approval, they also reduce the need to announce their plans. They begin working without constant discussion. This quiet approach protects focus. It reduces the influence of external opinions before progress is made. The person can develop ideas fully before exposing them to feedback. This leads to stronger execution because the work is not interrupted prematurely. Moving quietly allows growth to happen without unnecessary interference. Growth without approval also strengthens emotional independence. When a person depends on others' reactions, their emotional state can fluctuate. Positive feedback may increase confidence, while negative feedback may reduce it. Acting independently stabilizes this pattern. The person's emotional state becomes less dependent on external input. They feel more consistent because their confidence comes from their own actions. This stability supports long-term growth because it removes the emotional highs and lows caused by external validation. Another effect is improved focus on personal standards. When approval is no longer the priority, the person begins defining their own expectations. They decide what level of effort and quality is acceptable. This internal standard becomes the guide for action. The person is no longer trying to meet others' expectations. They are working toward their own goals. This clarity increases efficiency because decisions are aligned with personal direction. The mind becomes more organized, focusing on what truly matters. Growth without approval also reduces comparison. When a person seeks validation, they often compare themselves to others to measure their progress. This comparison can create doubt or distraction. Acting independently removes this habit. The person focuses on their own path without measuring it against others. This focus allows for consistent progress because attention is not divided. The mind becomes more stable, concentrating on improvement rather than comparison. Another benefit is the ability to take risks more freely. Seeking approval often limits risk because the person fears negative judgment. Without this concern, the person becomes more willing to try new approaches. They understand that not every attempt will succeed, but each attempt provides learning. This willingness to take risks accelerates growth. The person gains experience more quickly because they are not avoiding challenges. This experience strengthens confidence and skill over time. Growth without approval also improves decision-making speed. When a person no longer waits for validation, they can act immediately. This reduces delay and increases momentum. The person evaluates the situation and moves forward. Over time, this habit strengthens decisiveness. The mind becomes more efficient because it is practiced in making choices independently. This efficiency supports consistent progress. Another important change is the development of resilience to criticism. When a person is not dependent on approval, criticism loses its ability to stop progress. The person can listen, evaluate, and continue without becoming discouraged. This resilience allows them to maintain focus even when feedback is negative. The mind becomes stronger because it is not easily influenced by external opinions. Growth without approval also encourages deeper self-awareness. When a person relies on their own judgment, they must understand their strengths, weaknesses, and goals clearly. This understanding improves decision-making. The person becomes more intentional in their actions because they are guided by self-knowledge. Over time, this awareness strengthens independence and clarity. Another effect is the creation of long-term consistency. When progress is not tied to approval, it becomes stable. The person continues acting regardless of external reactions. This consistency leads to steady improvement. Small actions accumulate over time, creating significant results. The person builds momentum because they are not waiting for validation to continue. In the end, growth without approval becomes a way of thinking. The person no longer seeks permission to move forward. They act based on understanding, learn from experience, and adjust as needed. This independence creates a strong foundation for progress. the mind becomes focused, resilient, and self-directed. Over time, this approach leads to growth that is consistent, meaningful, and aligned with personal direction. Chapter 12. Becoming self-reliant. Becoming self-reliant begins with a shift in how a person sees responsibility. Instead of looking outward for direction, support, or solutions, they begin turning inward. This does not mean rejecting others or avoiding help completely. It means understanding that progress cannot depend on external conditions. When a person accepts that their movement is their responsibility, something changes. They stop waiting. Decisions become more direct because they are no longer tied to others' involvement. This shift creates independence in thinking and action. The person begins acting based on their own judgment, learning through experience instead of waiting for instruction. Over time, this builds a strong foundation. Self-reliance is not a single decision. It is a pattern developed through repeated choices to act independently, even when it feels unfamiliar. One of the first changes in becoming self-reliant is the ability to start without permission. Many people hesitate because they feel they need approval or confirmation before acting. This habit creates delay. Self-reliance removes this barrier. The person understands that not every step requires validation. They evaluate the situation and begin. This habit reduces hesitation because the mind no longer looks outward for reassurance. Instead, it trusts its ability to decide. Over time, starting becomes easier because it is no longer dependent on external approval. Self-reliance also strengthens decision-making. When a person relies on others, decisions often involve multiple perspectives. This can create confusion and delay. Acting independently simplifies the process. The person considers what is necessary and chooses a direction. This practice improves judgment because the person learns from their own decisions. Each outcome provides feedback, which strengthens understanding. Over time, the mind becomes more confident in its ability to choose effectively. Another important aspect is the development of problem-solving skills. When a person depends on others, challenges are often shared or resolved externally. Self-reliance requires the person to find solutions independently. This process strengthens thinking. The person learns to analyze situations, consider options, and act. Each problem solved builds confidence. The mind becomes more capable because it is actively engaged in finding solutions rather than waiting for them. Self-reliance also reduces dependence on external motivation. When progress depends on others, motivation may fluctuate based on their presence or encouragement. Acting independently creates internal motivation. The person learns to act based on their own goals rather than external influence. This internal drive is more stable because it does not depend on changing conditions. It supports consistent action, which leads to steady progress. Another benefit is the ability to maintain focus. When a person relies on others, attention may be divided between different perspectives and expectations. Self-reliance allows for clearer focus. The person works toward their own goals without constant distraction from external input. This clarity improves efficiency because the mind is not pulled in multiple directions. Over time, this focused approach leads to better results. Self-reliance also builds resilience. When a person acts independently, they face challenges directly. They learn to handle difficulty without relying on others to resolve it. This experience strengthens their ability to continue despite obstacles. The person becomes more adaptable because they have practiced responding to different situations. This resilience supports long-term growth because it allows the person to maintain progress even when conditions are not ideal. Another important change is the development of self-trust. Each independent action reinforces the belief that the person can rely on themselves. This trust grows through experience. The person sees that they can make decisions, take action, and adjust when necessary. Over time, this trust becomes stable. It reduces hesitation because the person no longer doubts their ability to move forward. Self-reliance also improves emotional stability. When a person depends on others, their emotional state may fluctuate based on external reactions. Acting independently creates a more stable foundation. The person's confidence comes from their own actions rather than from others' opinions. This stability allows them to remain focused even when external conditions change. Another benefit is the ability to create consistent habits. When a person is self-reliant, they establish routines that support their goals. These routines are not dependent on others, making them easier to maintain. Consistency strengthens these habits over time, creating a stable pattern of behavior. The mind becomes accustomed to regular action, which supports continuous progress. Self-reliance also encourages long-term thinking. When a person is responsible for their own progress, they consider the long-term impact of their actions. This perspective leads to better decisions because the person focuses on sustained growth rather than immediate comfort. Over time, this approach creates meaningful results. In the end, becoming self-reliant transforms how a person approaches life. They move from waiting to acting, from depending to deciding, and from uncertainty to clarity. This shift creates independence in both thought and behavior. The person becomes capable of guiding their own progress, building a life that is shaped by their actions rather than external conditions. Self-reliance deepens when a person begins trusting their ability to recover, not just their ability to act. Many hesitate because they fear making the wrong decision. They believe one mistake will stop their progress. But as they act independently, they learn something important. Progress is not built on perfect choices. It is built on the ability to adjust and continue. This understanding changes how decisions are approached. The person no longer waits for certainty. They act, observe the outcome, and adapt. Each recovery strengthens confidence. Over time, the fear of making mistakes decreases because the person trusts their ability to correct them. This creates freedom in action, allowing movement without constant hesitation. Another important shift is how effort is perceived. When a person becomes self-reliant, effort is no longer seen as something to avoid. It becomes part of the process. The person understands that meaningful progress requires consistent work. This acceptance reduces resistance. Instead of looking for easier paths, they focus on steady improvement. The mind adapts to this approach, making effort feel more natural. Over time, the person becomes more comfortable with challenges because they see them as opportunities to grow rather than obstacles to avoid. Self-reliance also strengthens discipline in daily routines. Without dependence on others, the person must create and follow their own structure. This responsibility builds consistency. The person learns to manage their time, prioritize tasks, and maintain focus. Each day of consistent effort reinforces this pattern. The mind becomes accustomed to structured action, reducing the need for external reminders. This discipline supports long-term progress by creating a stable foundation for growth. Another key aspect is the development of clarity in goals. When a person relies on others, their direction may be influenced by external expectations. Self-reliance encourages the person to define their own path. They consider what they truly want to achieve and align their actions with that vision. This clarity reduces confusion because decisions are guided by personal goals rather than external input. Over time, the person becomes more focused, allowing for more efficient progress. Self-reliance also improves adaptability in changing situations. When a person depends on others, unexpected changes can disrupt progress. Acting independently allows for quicker adjustments. The person can respond immediately to new challenges without waiting for guidance. This flexibility keeps momentum intact. The mind becomes more capable of handling uncertainty because it is used to making decisions independently. Another benefit is the reduction of distraction caused by external influences. When a person is self-reliant, they are less affected by others' opinions, expectations, or actions. This independence allows them to stay focused on their goals. The mind becomes more stable because it is not constantly reacting to external changes. This stability supports consistent action and improves overall performance. Self-reliance also builds a stronger sense of purpose. When actions are guided by personal decisions, they feel more meaningful. The person is not following someone else's direction. They are creating their own path. This sense of ownership increases motivation because the work is connected to their own goals. Over time, this purpose strengthens commitment, making it easier to maintain effort. Another important change is the ability to handle isolation without losing direction. Moving alone can feel uncomfortable at first, but it becomes easier with experience. The person learns that progress does not require constant interaction or support. They become comfortable working independently, which allows them to continue even when others are not involved. This ability strengthens consistency because it removes dependence on social conditions. Self-reliance also enhances decision-making confidence. Each independent choice provides feedback, improving understanding over time. The person becomes more skilled at evaluating situations and choosing effective actions. This experience reduces hesitation because decisions are based on learning rather than uncertainty. The mind becomes more decisive, supporting faster progress. Another benefit is the development of long-term resilience. When a person relies on themselves, they build the ability to continue despite challenges. They are not dependent on external support to stay motivated. This resilience allows them to maintain progress during difficult periods. Over time, this strength becomes part of their character, supporting sustained growth. Self-reliance also encourages continuous learning. Without relying on others for solutions, the person seeks knowledge actively. They explore new ideas, test different approaches, and refine their understanding. This curiosity supports growth because the person is always improving. The mind becomes more adaptable, able to handle new situations effectively. In the end, self-reliance becomes more than a habit. It becomes a way of thinking. The person trusts their ability to act, adapt, and continue. They no longer wait for conditions to align. They create their own progress through consistent action. This independence leads to a stable, focused, and resilient mindset, allowing them to move forward with clarity and confidence. Growth does not require isolation, but it does require independence. When your progress depends on others, it becomes uncertain. When it depends on you, it becomes consistent. The moment you take full responsibility, your direction becomes stable. You no longer wait, hesitate, or look for permission to move forward. Over time, moving alone builds something deeper than confidence. It builds trust in your own decisions. Each step you take, without relying on others, strengthens your ability to continue. What once felt difficult becomes natural. And as your independence grows, your life begins to move at a pace that no longer depends on anyone else, only on your willingness to keep going.